We're going to start drawing now, and before I go to the paper that I gridded, I want to show you some basic principles about how to draw through a grid by showing you some enlarged squares here so that it's easier to see, and also to explain to you how you need to set yourself up relative to your grid one more time before you start, okay, and how to set up your easel. First of all, if your line of sight is perpendicular to the grid, and thinking of the grid as a window, that means that when you go to your page, when you go to your paper or your canvas, your line of sight also has to be perpendicular to it. So in other words, don't do this with your canvas tweaked over like this or something like that, okay? Which seems self-explanatory, but it needs to be said. One way to conceive of it is, imagine that your line of sight is sort of like a ray that sticks out from your eye like this, okay? And as you come over to make a drawing mark over here, this is staying straight, okay? So you're looking here, and then you're looking over to here, and it's as if your line of sight is a fixed pole coming out of your eye that you're simply transferring over to this one, okay? And your line of sight is now in line with this one. That sounds crazy and complicated, but once you get going, you'll figure that out. Now, in traditional sight size method, which many of you I'm sure have seen, you have to have the canvas at the same exact same angle as the window. That's not the case here. You don't have to do that. It's not wrong to do that, but I find it sometimes a little bit unmanageable because sometimes I can't get the light on this or whatever. Technically, you can have this thing in your lap if you want. It doesn't matter as much. There's a couple of things about your easel, though. For instance, your easel should not be tipped back either. So I'm going to quickly check and see. And my easel looks pretty vertical, so I'm fine. But many easels already come tipped back. Make sure your easel's straight up and down. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting an accurate reading on your grid. Okay. When you're sitting down and you're looking, it's the same principle again. Imagine your line of sight as being like a fixed ray, and you're looking down at your pad like this, and then looking back up again. All right, you can do this, pretty much from any angle, so long as you understand what's happening. Okay, now as I'm getting set up again, I'm remembering my line of sight. I'm remembering my plumb. Okay. And I'm also remembering my line markers. Now, as I look at it now, remember I said that I want my line markers to be around a square like this. Okay, let's say this is my line of sight and the plumb that's lining up with that line back there. Okay, let me do that with the marker pen just to re-emphasize that a little bit better. I want my line markers to be doing this. Okay, that's going to tell me if I'm consistently forward or back. It's going to tell me. And by the way, don't feel that you're frozen. And if this gets a little bit, this way or that way, don't freak out. You're still standing in the same place. This is just to take into account things like posture, the mood you're in, the chair you're slumping in, and it can all make a difference, especially when you're very concerned about accuracy, which is what this is about. Okay, now, as far as drawing through a square, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take part of the still life and draw a little section of it to explain how I think about relating what's there to a square, okay? I'm not going to start as if I'm drawing the whole thing. I'm going to start over here in the corner and do a section of it right here, just to give you an idea of how to approach drawing within a square, okay? First of all, we have 2-inch squares on this for a reason. If they were 4-inch squares, you might get too much stuff inside one square, and then you almost feel like you don't have a grid anymore, right? If you had 1/4-inch squares, you'd certainly get a lot of points of measurement, but you'd also get a terrible headache just trying to, make sense out of all those tiny little squares. So 2 inches right in between those two extremes, obviously. But that does mean that when you're looking at the relationships of things inside one of these squares, you still got to do some drawing stuff. So I'm going to start by doing that right now. I'm going to move this just a little bit over. I'm looking down over at this one, okay, and the first and obvious thing that I'm looking at is I'm just picking a point and I'm saying, you know, the top of this mortar here, the top of the mortar, which is this thing right here, okay, I'm looking at that right now, and from where I am, I can see that the top edge of it does not come, I'm just guessing, does not go higher than, goes a little bit higher than halfway. So I can look there, and I'm just going to make a straight line, okay? And you might wonder, well, the top of the mortar isn't it curved? Well, yes, it is, but it's a very good idea when you're starting off to draw with straight lines, almost like segments. So I'm just going from here to here, and I'm trying to estimate the relationship of this distance to this distance here. Obviously it's not halfway, obviously it's above. And obviously it's not, if this is halfway, then pretty soon you start to be able to see a quarter as well. You know, this would be a quarter down here, a quarter of the distance, or on or about, okay? You can also start seeing these squares in terms of thirds. Okay, I'm going to go back to my drawing now. I'm making this line as my first line. Then I'm going back to my line of sight, but I'm glancing down there while keeping my head in the same spot. I'm glancing down there, and I'm seeing that the edge of this thing just sneaks past this string, and then it comes straight down, not quite to past this corner, but just to the outside of it. So it comes here and here. Let me do this in marker. So it's probably not very visible, right? Okay. Let me show you what I mean. For starters, I'm just going to make this kind of a straight line this way that I'm looking in. Sometimes this straight line style of drawing is called blocking in. That's a very old expression for it. And it's not because you're drawing blocks, it's just that you're understanding the relationship of a curve in a structured way. What does that mean? This is an unstructured curve, like that. That just means it's a line that starts at one place and keeps curving. Whereas if I were to make this line based on tangency points, I could do it something like this. Okay? This is a way of structuring a curve and starting out that way so that you get the feeling that the furthest point out is here, then it's here, and then it moves back. And then after you have these straight lines, then you can start to develop that curve as you go and make it more into a curve, as opposed to trying to just get that curve right first. What you do instead is you do a series of sections like this. And you've probably made those things when you were a child, where you take the nails and you pull the pieces of string across from one side to the other, and you make a beautiful curve, but it's all made out of straight lines, in the same way that suspension bridges sometimes have curves, and really they're not curves, they're a whole series of straight lines close together. Okay? So back to my drawing now. I see that this comes to here, and then when I come down to the next square, which is right here, I see that about halfway through, right about there, the corner of that thing starts to come down and then makes this beautiful little triangle shape. And when it comes over, it's about maybe a quarter, maybe slightly less that way. Here. Okay. Now what I might do is, rather than continuing down this way, what I might do, just to feel a little better about the universe, is I might come back up here, and I'll go back to my first square, and I'll say, I'm going to go a little bit that way now. Okay. By the way, I forgot to say, whenever you draw with a grid, always close one eye. I like to close my left eye, and I forgot to emphasize that. But you close one eye. Why do you do that? It's because I believe it's called the parallax effect. If you hold your hand up like this and you blink your eyes, you'll see your hand shifting back and forth. And that's because your vision is a result of two lenses coming together, and that's also how we get depth. When you close one eye, you don't have that kind of movement, that kind of distortion. That's also why we have the grid further away from us, because the further away things are from us, the less they move and the less they're distorted, okay? And so even though we're closing one eye, having the grid back there is easier. If it were right here and I move my head just a little bit, the grid would move a lot. But since it's further away, it's not so bad.